Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. This is the first one on the editorial side we recorded since SKS. We have with us Jen Marston. Hey Jen.
Hello from Tennessee.
And Chris Albrecht.
Hey Mike, how's it going?
I'm doing well. And the first story we have today I thought was interesting. Ordermark just continues to be red hot, but they have a new fundraise. But what's interesting about this is they're going to use some funding to do a new ghost kitchen?
Well, kind of, yeah. So they announced today that they closed $120 million Series C funding led by SoftBank Vision Fund. What they're doing is it's kind of ghost kitchen, but Ordermark also has this company called NextBite, which is essentially a portfolio of virtual restaurant brands that it runs and operates. And so they're using some of this funding to build out this NextBite platform. And what they do, so they're not a ghost kitchen in the sense that Kitchen United is a ghost kitchen where it's a gigantic, warehouse size space that has 16 kitchens in it. It rents out to restaurants. What NextBite is actually doing is they're going in search of what they're calling underutilized kitchen space. So a restaurant may be slow business because of the pandemic and the shutdowns. They have extra space in their kitchen and maybe time and resources to fulfill more orders. So NextBite can actually move the operations of a virtual restaurant brand into that kitchen. The restaurant that owns the kitchen then gets to make a little bit of extra money by getting cut into the deal, basically. So they have, I believe it's 16 virtual restaurants on the NextBite platform, and I expect the press release was a little bit vague, but I expect that we're going to see a lot more brands join the NextBite platform with this funding.
It seems like the virtual restaurant and ghost kitchen angle has lots of people excited, and it's interesting that that's where they're getting this big money. I've been just interested to watch Alex Cantor as an entrepreneur and, Ordermark, which evolved out of Cantor's Deli, become this kind of ever-evolving, interesting, and fairly hot startup. So it's really interesting to see them get this big funding.
Yeah, I think the size of the fundraise just suggests how big virtual restaurants are currently and going to get. I think this is the latest, but we've just, the news about companies opening virtual food halls, virtual restaurants is just nonstop lately. I mean, it makes sense, obviously, but, it's just Ordermark has just sort of positioned itself to where it's kind of right at the center of two really important restaurant technologies. So,
I think we had this conversation on our editorial call last week. I think spinning out of the panel at SKS on virtual restaurants, in that it seems like this space is white hot, but it's also a space that I think could be potentially full of interesting startups that may not last very long, potential scammers, but also I think there's going to be a tiering of legitimate hot virtual restaurants. I think Ordermark could be one of those that spins out some premium brands. It's interesting that they're also doing the LA angle. It seems two of the virtual restaurant operators that we've talked to, Ordermark, NextBite, and also Family Style, both have celebrity ties. I think they have the Wiz Khalifa one, and then also we saw the Pizza Aoki coming out of the Family Style. It's a really interesting new business, and it seems like a lot of people are leveraging personal celebrity brands to spin out their virtual restaurants.
And there's also a push for celebrity chefs. I mean, and we haven't yet posted the story because I'm still writing it, but this information is public. There's a virtual food hall about to launch in Boise, Idaho, that has a number of Michelin star well-known chefs. And their concept is really interesting because it's a bit like Lunchbox, where it's focused on this more fine dining aspect, which I'm not going to spoil the whole piece, guys. We'll wait till it publishes on The Spoon. But there are some very interesting takes on how higher end establishments can stay in business through virtual restaurants that maybe we hadn't even thought about 6 months ago.
Chris, you reported this story on Brigo, which is a company we've all been following for some time. And we noticed over the past, month or so, they went dark. And we're trying to figure out what's going on with them. Well, lo and behold, we found out this week It looks like they got bought by Coca-Cola.
Yeah, well, at least Coca-Cola subsidiary Costa Coffee, right? Coffee, based out of London. So Brigo makes an automated coffee barista robot, right? We've been writing about them for a couple of years. They're based out of Austin, Texas. The Brigo machine, like Cafe X, is a robotic coffee vending, makes your lattes, your teas, all kinds of drinks. And yeah, we haven't heard from them in a while. And we had heard rumors that they had gotten bought by Coca-Cola, but were never able to sort of substantiate those. I wasn't able to anyway. And then yesterday on Twitter, they sort of took the wraps off and said Brigo is now Costa Coffee, and the Costa Coffee machine is now rebranded as the Barista Bot. So, what we don't know, we've reached out to people, haven't heard back yet, just in terms of, was it a full-on acquisition? We know terms of the deal that we know of. Right. We know that Brigo raised $19 million in funding, but the Brigo robots are now Costa Coffee robots. And you don't even see, like, Brigo's website is now fully rebranded. So yeah, it's just interesting, one, for a couple of reasons, which is the automated coffee space. Brigo's big thing was they were going to be in 25 airports over this year and next. And that they started the year like, hey, we're guns a-blazing. We're doing really well. They sent out a press release saying how well they were doing. This was in the wreckage of, like, Zoom shutting down, right? And everybody associated them with food robotics, and Cafe X shuttering some of its locations. And so I think they were trying to signal to the world, like, hey, we're doing fine. We're going to open up 5 locations in Q1. And they had partnered with SSP America, which works with food vendors and airports. But as we know, the pandemic came along and decimated air travel, right? So I have no idea what sort of conditions this takeover were under. Was it under duress? Was it like a fire sale? Was it something that had been in the offing for a long time? We just don't know.
It's kind of a weird thing. They did come out in January and had all this, like, hey, this is going to be the best year ever. And like everyone, we got thrown for a loop. Everyone got thrown for a loop because of the pandemic. So you wonder if, was it related to that, airports being shut down, or maybe they just got an offer they couldn't refuse. I mean, we can't rule that out either, right? Like, maybe Costa Coffee saw, hey, this is the future of coffee, this retail. We want to get in. We want to be in the Brigo business, and they bought them.
Yeah, I mean, it could absolutely be that, right? Like, Costa Coffee is a big brand, and it's a way, an automated kiosk, ideally, is a way for you to sort of extend your brand into different places without having to build a full-on store. And one of the things Brigo prided itself on was really excellent coffee, and really, like, it didn't just spit out lattes. Like, it took a lot of care in figuring out how to dispense milks and keep things, different kinds of milks, and keep ice and all this stuff. So it should be, in theory, it is a way for Costa to go in and go, like, okay, we're going to put our brand inside a supermarket, or inside a hotel, or inside an airport, or inside a bus station, or inside a, office building. Again, without having to, like, do a full on, all you need, I think, is a drain and a plug. If I remember correctly, from what Brigo was building out before. And then you've got yourself a 24-hour coffee stand that's contactless.
I mean, I wonder, with a big brand like Costa now having this branded coffee kiosk, because as you said, Chris, there have been some kinks for that particular industry in the last several months. So I wonder if just having a big brand like Costa behind one of these machines is just going to give the sector more of a boost. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Brigo, at the same time it was building robots, was also, like, it selected its own beans and roasted its own coffee, right? So it was really wanting to be full stack coffee provider. And, it sort of eased off that as it opened up in San Francisco airport. Like, it incorporated sight glass coffee, and its plan was to offer beans from local roasters wherever it opened up. Because I think that owner operator model is really tough when you're trying to scale up. If you have to be responsible for the maintenance and supply of coffee machines throughout the world, like, that's tough for a startup to build from scratch. But Costa Coffee already does that, right? Like, they already shuttle beans everywhere and have processes and menus and recipes that they can do. And also, brand recognition. So, do you want a Brigo coffee when you're at the airport, or do you want a Starbucks coffee? Well, Starbucks is going to be good, right? So
no, we don't. But okay, well, but I'll take your word.
There was anecdotal. There was anecdotal stories that, like, when the machines first came on in San Francisco, that the Brigo, there was never a line for the Brigo and I think part of that is people just didn't know what it was. It's a whole new thing, especially the name Brigo. I don't know what that means, but Costa Coffee, well, I know what that means. And so I'll try that out. So I think it definitely has sort of the deep pockets of Coca-Cola, the brand recognition of Costa Coffee, and just sort of the logistical processes in place to scale that up and to bring those kinds of things to the next level.
I mean, as much as like Cafe X was kind of like a little bit theater, and you didn't necessarily need these big robotic arms to make your coffee, it did draw people to it, and you wanted to insert coins in the jukebox, if you per se, to watch them just make you a coffee. Like this, the thing about Brigo, it's cool, but it's not really all that different than maybe just a giant big vending machine for coffee. I mean, we've seen coffee machines, right, where you can get an automated coffee. That's not super new. They're definitely more of a automated robotic approach, but I guess not having that theatrical kind of truly on the nose robotic angle probably also hurt them in the early days.
Yeah, I think, there was, the idea when you saw Cafe X, it would definitely look like a robot. And to your point, they put it front and center. It was an articulating arm that would wave at you and do stuff, right? And Brigo made the decision to be more of like a machine, and all the robotics were tucked away inside the machine. And so they weren't on display. And that was a conscious choice they made because they wanted it like, we're going to get it to you fast and it's going to be good. And we have all these things and have worked out all the processes for sliding liquids around without them spilling in all this stuff. So, again, Cafe X too, which closed its airport location. So it doesn't have any locations left in the US, laid off a bunch of people. But they have orders now to be in China, and I don't know if it's China, but in Asia. And they said that they're going to be deploying like 150 machines over the next couple of years over in Asia. So
it's interesting. It seems like we're seeing lots of momentum for restaurant robotics, back of house. We've seen Bear Robotics gaining momentum for their front of house automated server. But it seems like maybe there's a little bit of a pullback on the automated retail and vending side, which is weird in a contactless world. You would expect maybe, or maybe it isn't. Maybe people are afraid of just touching this. Maybe people are traveling less, so there's less of a need. But it just definitely seems like that. And it's something that I think I heard from Winnie Lung from Bits and Bytes that is happening in China, where they have seen a pullback because about a couple of years ago, you saw a big push towards automated robotic retail in China. And she said there's been a pullback on that. So it's interesting to see maybe that's happening in the US as well.
So a couple of things I would say to that. One is, I'm sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No, please, you're the expert here.
Well, like one of the things I would say that is one, if you look at this sort of Costa Coffee Brigo thing, right? You see this also with Chowbotics and their Sally robot, which has partnered with SaladWorks or Salad Station, right, to be in grocery stores. So you can have the salad bar without having the buffet style salad bar. And it's also branded. So you may not know Chowbotics, but if you live in that area, you'll know Salad Station. It's the same concept, right? And I think, Mike, one of the things that we brought up during SKS, during my panel on vending machines with Fresh Bowl and Byte, was just the term vending machines. Like evidently that was a huge turnoff for potential customers and locations because they're like, vending machines. We don't want a vending machine, right? So they like Fresh Bowl, Chloe V. Show said like, we take that out of the emails. We don't use the word in the subject lines. We don't use it in our presentation decks because it immediately turns people off. So, they started using the word kiosk as a way to try and back into it. But like, yeah, it's, I think that's a big thing.
That's interesting. Well, this naming and nomenclature for something new is a great segue to the next story because, Chris, you had the story about veggie burgers in the EU and whether or not we can call them and name them burgers or meats. And apparently there was a victory for the plant-based meat world, and that the EU, the European Parliament, rejected a proposal from the EU Agriculture Committee that said you can't use those terms.
Yeah, this is something that's going on all around the world, right? Like as we've seen the increase of sales of plant-based meats, entrenched parties are like, hey, whoa, what's happening? We're being replaced, traditional animal meat companies, right? Like we're being subsumed. And so you can see these tactics of like, you can't call it a burger. You can't call it a veggie burger because that will confuse people. Well, it's not, because you're calling it a veggie burger, right? Like you're not calling it like hamburger with 2 A's or something, right? Like you are, companies are out there calling it veggie burger, and we've called it that for a long time. So the EU was like, yeah, common sense sort of prevailed here, and you didn't have to call them a veggie disc or, a veggie tube if you're making a plant-based sausage or hot dog or something. So, it is
veggie
something
tube.
A veggie, yeah, gross. But we're fighting the same kinds of battles here in the U.S. There are a number of states that have created legislation around what you can call a burger, and again, you just see it from lobbying groups like the Cattlemen's Association.
On the milk side too, right?
Yeah, on the milk side. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Oh, I feel like this is a losing battle for the companies that want to prevent plant-based meat companies from using burger or sausage. I mean, I think the fact that it's been happening all over the world for quite a while now, for at least the last couple of years. And it just seems like the victories are overtaking the losses in terms of and we're also seeing big meat. And I know this was mentioned at SKS last week. I can't remember who said it, unfortunately, but this idea of big meat and plant-based meat companies or alt meat companies collaborating together, which that's already happening quite a bit. And you've also got, Tyson releasing plant-based versions of meat and combinations and things like that. And I think that's going to keep happening more. The more that happens, the less worry there's going to be around big meat that, we're being replaced. We need to make sure they don't use burger or sausage in their product name. So I think it's only a matter of time before this becomes a non-issue.
It seems like the meat companies, the processors and the packagers are starting to bend and get on board. I would imagine it's like more, at least in the U.S., like the suppliers, like the cattle and the farmers, that are probably going to be less willing to move because, if you have a bunch of cattle, chances are you're not going to suddenly start producing plant-based meat.
Right.
You can
plant-based cows.
But like Tyson's like, hey, we're just going to provide product, whether it's plant-based or real poultry. Ultimately, maybe we're just an arms dealer. We're just selling this to the consumer. They probably are over time maybe indifferent, but it's I would think it's the suppliers that are more worried. So this naming conversation, I think, is going to continue. It's interesting. I think part of it also is like, where is it going to be in the store? I've noticed over the past year, definitely starting to see Impossible and Beyond placed next to traditional meat. For a while, I can never find it. It'd be next to like the soy burgers or the soy meat, which oftentimes wasn't even in the meat section. But now you're starting to see the grocery stores putting them next to each other.
Yeah, big Beyond Meat's big thing was when they came to retail, they're like, yeah, we want to be put in the meat section. But I don't think grocers really did that because I never found it.
Yeah.
I always find it in the frozen food section. With the other, like with the corn and Morningstar and the other plant-based products. And I've never found it in the meat section.
I guess it depends on the type of grocery store, right? Like if you go to Sprouts, they're a pretty progressive.
Look at you throwing out your fancy grocers.
Oh, yeah, they're pretty progressive. So they put Impossible and Beyond right next to the other frozen meat.
What's interesting I usually shop at Publix down the road here in Tennessee, and the Beyond is always in the frozen food section with the Morningstar and the corn and all that. But the Impossible is in the meat section. So, I just wonder, I don't know if it's a store thing, if companies are paying more, there's a different licensing or distribution model that's happening, but it seems like a brand by brand case as to where these products are getting placed.
Yeah, and it might be a money thing. Money talks, and
pay more, get your product put next to the actual beef. It makes sense to me.
The slotting fees, yeah.
All right, the final story we have this week is based on a contributed piece, by a guy named Ron Shigeta. Ron actually published this on his own Medium, and we liked it enough where we said, "Hey, Ron, can we publish this on the Spoon?" And the title of the piece is "Lab-Grown Meat is Scaling Like the Internet." And this is just an interesting topic in that I've been thinking a lot about, we've all come from more traditional tech backgrounds, and you certainly see traditional tech investors like Bill Gates getting into alt meats and alternative proteins. You've seen that Dave Freiberg do that. He came from Google. And so the question has always been, will things like lab-grown meat have the same type of economics and scaling concepts that could apply to it as the internet? And what Ron argues is yes. So he actually had an interesting chart in this piece where he looks at and he graphs out Moore's law, and he shows how cultured meat price points are coming down over time. And he says that it's largely been there's been almost like a war dividend. This concept of the huge investment in cell-based in human genome research has really contributed to the price declines of lab-grown meat. So I thought that was a really interesting concept.
And I think it gets back to back to SKS, which is cell-based meat going to be a thing or not going to be a thing? Like Pat Brown said, nope, never. And, Josh Tetrick, is that who is the CEO of Just Eat? Yeah, I was like, nope, definitely it will be. It's just 15 years. I mean, you had a big conversation with him, Jen, at SKS, where he talked about that.
I mean, I think the big takeaway in my mind from that conversation that is important to any discussion about cell-based meat scaling is that there's a huge difference between, we have a successful prototype in a restaurant and we're on the store shelves next to the beef burgers or the Impossible meat, and we're available in, Birmingham, Alabama, or wherever. And we're definitely nowhere near that point where it's just as ubiquitous as, it's a lot of companies are saying they're still a couple years away from even having a real prototype out there. I mean, some obviously are doing taste tests, but I do think that difference between prototype and actual mass market product that is making a difference in how much animal slaughter is in the food system, that needs to be recognized in terms of the discussion around how the possibilities of cell-based meat becoming a reality.
Yeah, it's so interesting to contrast Pat Brown, who basically dismisses culture meat as like never going to happen. They basically said that never going to happen. And Josh Tetrick, who is, CEO of Just, which is an interesting company because they have plant-based, but they also are doing cultured. And he laid out for the first time, I think I've heard any CEO, a really fairly phased out timeline. And he, I think Jenny is 4 phases, right? Like the first phase, we'll have it next year in like the highest end restaurant in the world. Yeah. A single restaurant. And then, maybe in a couple of years beyond that, a bunch of nice restaurants. And then beyond that, you start to get into the high end craft retailers. And then like 15 years from now, it's like you're in Safeway type of thing. So it was interesting that he had that phased overall approach, which I thought was nice concreteness to like what has been a fairly hard to understand market for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the final phase of that he spoke about was this. He called it the Coca-Cola phase, where you're in China, you're in Germany, you're in the U.S., just like Coca-Cola, just like McDonald's. You're so ubiquitous that we can go pretty much anywhere in the world, and the chances of us finding this product are very, very high. And he was saying that final phase, that's the one where 15 plus years away from reaching. But depending on if you're looking at cell-based meat as a sustainable alternative to animal-based meat, that's the stage. That ubiquitousness is what we need to get to in order for this format to actually make a difference in the food system.
We're in the prototyping stage. Higher Stakes had their prototype, and even the culture prototypes a lot of them are using plant-based ingredients in a hybrid type of approach to create structure and create like a full steak, for example, because you can't quite get there in a lot of ways cheaply doing fully cultured. I was excited for the first time ever SKS Startup Showcase. We actually had a cultured meat startup, right? So we had Cultured Decadence, which actually showed off their cultured shellfish, and they actually showed us a video and took us into the lab. So this stuff is definitely becoming more democratized. It's definitely not it'll take a while until we get to the Coca-Cola stage, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thought about it would be, I just wonder if I'm not sure anybody needs to be, whether it's Josh Tetrick, whether it's Pat Brown, whether it's, whoever. I don't know that we're at the phase where we need to be making blanket statements of it's definitely going to happen or it's never going to happen. I mean, this is, I think, Ron's point, I thought he made a really good point of just the sheer number of cell ag companies that have cropped up in the last couple of years. I mean, he said something like there are 80 or more than 80, and there were like 4 a couple of years ago or something like that. So there's obviously a lot of people trying things and a lot of growth. And I think it's too soon to say this is going to be too expensive and we'll never realize its potential, or, this is definitely part of the future food system. Yeah, I don't know. I think
we like CEO fights. Come on. It's like,
no, I love CEO fights. See, they give us fodder to talk like we are now.
Well, the other thing, we talk a lot about the meats and steaks, but fish could be like Shiok Meats is over in Asia, but even Blue Nalu over here in San Diego, they just put a new production facility online that'll be producing, I think next year when it's up and running, like 200 pounds of, commercial grade yellowfin, I think, cell-based yellowfin, like a week. Like that's not a lot, right? Obviously, you can't feed a lot of people on just 200 pounds, but that's a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so much of these guys are investing. Like the prototype stage is happening, but the next big stage is the production facility. So a lot of it's pilot plants, and so I think getting to that high scale, high volume market, that's going to be really interesting, and what I'm going to be watching closely over the next couple of years. So it'll be a fun part of the conversation. But this has been a good conversation, guys. I'm glad we got together. Have you guys gotten sleep since SKS?
Nah.
I mean, there's nothing else to worry about in the world right now, so I have been sleeping like a baby.
So, yeah, we're a week out from the election. We won't get into politics, though.
No, let's do it. Let's just alienate. Let's just
alienate.
let's just get down into the muck.
All right, guys, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks,
All right,
Mike.
bye, everyone.
Bye.